A millionaire, the kind of guy who had it all: money, power, the best of everything, stood in front of a horse he'd just decided was worthless. Too slow. Too weak. Not worth feeding another day. So he did what rich men with too much pride do: he got rid of it. Just like that. But what he didn't know, that horse had a secret. A gift buried so deep, even the experts missed it. And the only person who saw it, a poor farmer with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Now, let's rewind a little. The millionaire wasn't a bad guy, just impatient. He wanted winners, and he wanted them fast. This horse? It wasn't living up to his standards. Failed races, sluggish times, no fire in its eyes. Or so he thought. So he sold it off for next to nothing, barely enough to cover a month's feed. The farmer who bought it? He wasn't some horse whisperer or genius trainer. Just a man who knew hard work, who'd spent his whole life scraping by, watching the rich play their games while he struggled to keep his land. But he saw something in that horse. A flicker. A spark. Something nobody else noticed. At first, people laughed. That old thing? They'd say. You wasted your money. Even his own family doubted him. But the farmer didn't care. He worked with the horse day after day, not forcing it to run, not yelling, not pushing, just watching. And then, one morning, he saw it. A burst of speed so fast it left his heart pounding. Just for a second. Like lightning. That's when he knew. This horse wasn't slow. It had been holding back all along. But here's the thing: talent alone isn't enough. The farmer had no money for trainers, no fancy track, no sponsors. Just a dirt field and a dream. And the millionaire? Well, he wasn't paying attention. Not yet. But when word starts spreading about a nobody farmer and a useless horse suddenly outrunning every other stallion in town, people take notice. And that's when things get dangerous. Because the rich don't like losing, especially not to the little guy. The farmer had always been the kind of man who saw potential where others saw failure. Maybe it was because he'd spent his whole life being overlooked too, just another poor man in a small town where money talked louder than hard work. But when he first laid eyes on that horse, something inside him just knew. It wasn't the way it moved, because back then, it barely did. It wasn't the way it looked: thin, tired, like it had given up long ago. No, it was the eyes. There was still fire there, buried deep. A quiet defiance. And that was enough for him. The millionaire, on the other hand, had no patience for anything less than perfection. His stables were filled with champion bloodlines, horses bred for speed, trained by the best. So when this one didn't perform, he didn't waste time wondering why. He cut his losses and moved on. To him, it was just business. But here's the thing about people with money: they never like being proven wrong. And if word got out that he'd tossed aside a horse with real talent, well, that wouldn't just bruise his ego. It could ruin his reputation. Meanwhile, the farmer worked in silence. No fancy equipment, no team of experts, just him, the horse, and the open field behind his crumbling barn. At first, the animal barely responded. It would trot lazily, stopping whenever it pleased, like it had forgotten what it felt like to run. But the farmer didn't force it. He didn't yell or whip or demand. Instead, he waited. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped low and the air turned cool, something shifted. The horse's ears pricked up. Its muscles tensed. And then it ran. Not the slow, hesitant gait of before, but a full, powerful sprint, so fast the farmer's breath caught in his chest. Dust kicked up in its wake, the wind whistling past as if the earth itself was surprised. That was the moment everything changed. The farmer knew this wasn't just a good horse. This was something special. But he also knew the danger of that knowledge. Small towns talk. And it wouldn't be long before someone noticed. Sure enough, whispers started. A stable hand who'd seen the horse flying across the field mentioned it to a friend. That friend told a trainer, and before long, the rumors reached the wrong ears. The millionaire's ears. At first, he dismissed it. Impossible. That horse was a dud, he'd seen it himself. But then the stories grew. People claimed it wasn't just fast, it was unnaturally fast. Like nothing they'd ever seen. And that's when the millionaire's curiosity turned into something darker. Suspicion. Anger. Greed. He sent someone to watch, to see if the stories were true. And when the report came back confirming everything, his face went cold. Because if that horse really was that good, then he'd made a mistake. A very expensive mistake. Back at the farm, the farmer could feel the air changing. Strangers lingered at the edges of his property. Questions came a little too casually from people who'd never given him the time of day before. He knew what was coming, but he also knew something they didn't. The horse wasn't just fast. It was waiting. And the moment it was pushed, the farmer wasn't a fool. He knew the moment outsiders started showing up, pretending to be curious neighbors or passing travelers, that trouble was coming. The horse, now sleek and strong from months of patient care, had become something people whispered about in town. Some called it a fluke. Others swore it was the fastest thing they'd ever seen. But the worst kind of talk? The kind that reached the ears of those who didn't like being proven wrong. One evening, as the farmer cooled the horse down after another blistering sprint across the field, a sleek black car rolled up the dirt road toward his farm. The windows were tinted, the engine purring like a predator stalking its prey. His stomach tightened. He didn't need to see who was inside to know this wasn't a friendly visit. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel. Not the millionaire himself. No, a man like that wouldn't dirty his hands. This was someone else. A fixer. A man who made problems disappear. "Nice horse," the stranger said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Heard it's got potential." The farmer kept his grip loose on the reins, his voice steady. "Just an old plow horse. Nothing special." The man chuckled, pulling out a cigarette. "See, that's the thing. My boss doesn't believe in nothing special. He believes in proof." He took a slow drag, exhaling smoke into the evening air. "And right now, there's a lot of talk about proof." The farmer said nothing. He didn't have to. They both knew what this was about. The millionaire wanted his horse back. Or, if he couldn't have it, he wanted to make sure nobody else could either. That night, the farmer didn't sleep. He sat on his porch, shotgun across his lap, staring into the darkness. The horse stood in the paddock, ears flicking at every rustle in the trees. It knew, too. Danger was coming. Meanwhile, in the city, the millionaire wasn't just sitting idle. He had other plans. If this horse was as fast as they said, then it wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about money. Big money. The kind that changed lives. Or ruined them. He made calls, pulled favors, set things in motion. Races could be fixed. Judges could be bought. And farmers? Well, farmers could be persuaded. By morning, the first offer arrived. A number so high it made the farmer's hands shake just holding the paper. Enough to pay off his debts, fix his land, live comfortably for the rest of his life. All he had to do was sign. Hand over the horse. Walk away. But then he looked at the animal, really looked. At the way it stood tall now, muscles coiled like a spring, eyes bright with a fire that had been buried for too long. This wasn't just a horse. It was a second chance. For both of them. He crumpled the paper and tossed it into the stove. The next day, another visitor came. Not a suit this time. A trainer, one of the best in the country, sent to assess the horse. The farmer knew the game. If they couldn't buy him, they'd discredit him. Make it seem like the horse was nothing without their help. But when the trainer watched the horse run, his face went pale. "This isn't just speed," he muttered. "This is something else." And that's when the farmer realized this wasn't just about money or pride anymore. This was about control. And the millionaire wasn't the only one who wanted it. Because now, others were watching. And they played much dirtier. The farmer stood in the empty barn, listening to the distant rumble of engines approaching. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The offers had been refused. The threats ignored now. They were coming to take what they wanted by force. His fingers tightened around the worn leather of the horse's lead rope. He had one chance, one shot to prove the world wrong. Word had spread like wildfire after the trainer's visit. Gamblers, rival owners, even reporters had started lurking around the edges of his property, all hungry for a glimpse of the horse. Everyone was calling the ghost because that's how it ran. Like something not quite of this world. Fast enough to make legends. Fast enough to make dangerous men very, very angry. The farmer knew he couldn't stay hidden anymore. If he wanted to protect the horse, he had to race it. Really race it. Not in some backfield where only whispers carried the truth, but out in the open, where the whole world could see. There was a big stakes event coming up, the kind where rich men parked their yachts near the finish line and bet more money in one afternoon than the farmer would see in a lifetime. If the horse could win there, nobody could take that away. Not even the millionaire. But entering meant walking straight into the lion's den. The millionaire would be there. His trainers. His judges. His money. And they wouldn't let some nobody farmer show them up without a fight. The night before the race, the farmer didn't sleep. He sat with the horse in the quiet of the barn, running his hands over its sleek coat, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "Just run like I know you can," he murmured. "Just run like you're free." When dawn broke, the farm was too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the heavy sense of something about to break. The farmer loaded the horse into the trailer, his hands steady but his heart pounding. He knew what was waiting for him at that track. Knew the risks. But he also knew if they didn't do this, they'd never be free. The racetrack was a circus. Cameras. Crowds. Men in suits with cold eyes watching his every move. The millionaire stood near the finish line, surrounded by his people, sipping champagne like he'd already won. When his gaze locked onto the farmer, he didn't smile. Didn't nod. Just stared. A silent warning. The farmer ignored him. He led the horse to the starting gate, ignoring the murmurs, the laughter, the bets being placed against him. The other horses were champions bred for this, trained for this, owned by men who thought they owned the world. And then there was his. A scrappy nobody with fire in its eyes. The gates clanged open. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, the world exploded into speed. The horse didn't just run. It flew, streaking ahead like it had been waiting its whole life for this moment. The crowd roared. The millionaire's face twisted in disbelief. The farmer's heart threatened to burst from his chest as he watched the impossible unfold before him. But then, a shadow moved at the edge of the track. A figure. A distraction. And in that split second, the horse faltered. The farmer's blood turned to ice. They were cheating. And now, the race wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about surviving. The horse recovered its stride in a heartbeat, but the damage was done. Those precious seconds lost were enough to let the millionaire's prize stallion surge ahead. The crowd's cheers turned to gasps as the underdog suddenly became the long shot again. The farmer's fists clenched as he saw the figure disappear into the crowd. Someone had been paid to interfere, and they'd done their job well. But then something unexpected happened. A roar went up from the stands as the horse did what no one thought possible. It found another gear. Its muscles coiled like springs, its hooves barely touching the ground as it devoured the distance between itself and the leader. The announcer's voice cracked with disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. This horse isn't just fast, it's rewriting the rules." The millionaire's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the ground. His face went pale. This wasn't supposed to happen. His trainers exchanged frantic glances. They drugged the water buckets, paid off the starter, even loosened the farmer's saddle girth before the race. None of it had worked. And then the unthinkable. As the horses thundered toward the final stretch, the millionaire's stallion suddenly veered sideways, its eyes rolling wild with panic. It wasn't just losing, it was terrified, as if it sensed something unnatural in the animal streaking past it. The farmer's horse crossed the finish line a full length ahead, the crowd erupting in chaos. But the farmer didn't celebrate, because standing at the rail, staring at the horse with a mix of hunger and cold calculation, was a man the farmer had only heard about in whispers, a billionaire known for collecting rare things. Fast cars, private islands, and now, apparently, unbeatable horses. The millionaire had been a problem. This man, he was a nightmare. And as the farmer locked eyes with him across the track, he realized the race had been the easy part. The billionaire didn't move like a man who needed to rush. He strolled toward the farmer with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his tailored suit worth more than the farm itself. "Remarkable animal," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "I'd like to make you a deal." The farmer knew this wasn't an offer, it was a trap. The millionaire had been greedy, but this man, he was something worse. Ruthless. The kind of man who didn't just want to win, he wanted to own anything that could make him unbeatable. And now, he'd set his sights on the horse. "Not for sale," the farmer said, his voice steady despite the sweat on his palms. The billionaire chuckled, like he'd expected that answer. "Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price." He pulled out a checkbook, the kind that could rewrite a man's life with a single stroke of a pen. But before he could write a number, the horse suddenly reared up, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Not in fear, in warning. The billionaire's bodyguards tensed, hands drifting toward hidden weapons. The crowd fell silent. That's when the farmer saw it. The horse wasn't just fast. It was protecting him. A low murmur spread through the stands. No one had ever seen a horse act like this, not just an athlete, but a guardian. The billionaire's smile flickered. He hadn't accounted for this. You couldn't buy loyalty like that. Then, a gunshot cracked through the air. The crowd screamed, scattering in panic. The farmer spun around, expecting an ambush, but it wasn't the billionaire's men. It was the millionaire, his face twisted in rage, a smoking pistol in his hand. He hadn't just lost the race, he'd lost his reputation. And now, he'd come to destroy what he couldn't have. The horse moved faster than thought. It charged. Not toward the millionaire, toward his prize stallion still trembling in the track's center. The two animals locked eyes for a heartbeat. Then, in a move no one could explain, the stallion bolted not away, but with the farmer's horse, the two sprinting side by side toward the open gates at the far end of the track. The millionaire howled in fury, firing again, but it was too late. The horses were gone, vanished into the twilight like ghosts. The billionaire stared at the empty track, his checkbook forgotten. For the first time in his life, money had failed him. The farmer didn't chase after them. He just smiled. Because some things, they weren't meant to be owned. But as the sun set, one question lingered in the air. Where did they go? And more importantly, would they ever come back? The days that followed were filled with whispers. Some claimed they'd seen the two horses running wild through the hills, faster than the wind, untouchable. Others said they'd vanished for good spirits of the land that had only borrowed flesh and bone for a little while. The farmer never chased them. He knew better than to try and cage something that belonged to the sky. The millionaire? He lost everything. The scandal of firing a gun at a public race ruined him. His trainers left, his stable emptied, and the last anyone heard, he'd sold his estate and disappeared. The billionaire, though, he didn't give up so easily. For months, scouts combed the countryside, offering rewards for any sign of the horses. But no one ever claimed them. Maybe because no one could catch them. Or maybe because some folks knew some things are worth more than money. As for the farmer, he went back to his land. The world expected him to be broken, to regret not taking the fortune that had been offered, but he just smiled and got to work. Funny thing, people started showing up at his farm. Not suits with checkbooks, but ordinary folks. Kids who wanted to see where the legend had lived. Riders hoping to learn from the man who'd seen true speed. And without even trying, he built something new. A place where people remembered that greatness isn't always about winning. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to let go. Years later, on quiet evenings, old-timers still argue about what really happened that day. Some say the horses are still out there, running where the earth meets the horizon. Others insist they never existed at all, just a story folks tell to remind themselves that miracles can happen. But every now and then, when the sun dips low and the air turns gold, people swear they hear it the distant thunder of hooves. Too fast to be real. Too wild to ever be tamed. And maybe that's the point. Not every gift is meant to be kept. Some are just meant to remind us that the world is bigger than we think, and that sometimes the best endings are the ones that never really end.